Hi, my name is Dylan Hong, and today we're going to be talking about the BenQ EL2870U 28-inch HDR 4K monitor. Think I get it all. You can pick up this 28-inch 4K monitor on Amazon for about $400, and I'll link the description below. And BenQ, when they sent the monitor to me, told me that it was very much of a 4K gaming monitor. It has a 1 millisecond response time and is relatively inexpensive for a large 4K monitor. With Freesync enabled, and I'm actually going to be testing out Freesync with an Nvidia GPU with this monitor, it kind of makes sense that it'd be a good gaming monitor, but I don't use it like that. I actually have a 144Hz monitor, and my game of choice is Csgo, as many of you would know if you've seen my videos, so I don't really have much need for a monitor that has a refresh rate of 60Hz. But I don't only play Csgo, so I do have other productivity uses and other gaming uses with my Nintendo Switch, and lately I've been using this BenQ monitor as a secondary monitor or my primary monitor for the Nintendo Switch. So in this review, I'm going to show the unboxing process, talk a little bit about the software and hardware in the monitor itself, and then examine some use cases. While unboxing the monitor, it's pretty standard. It's styrofoam and packaging, and that's about it. The unboxing experience was fine, and it took me about 15 minutes to get everything up and running, but I was kind of just taking my time and also had to record everything I was doing. The monitor stand that it sits on is okay. It was pretty solid, a nice heft for an included monitor stand, but right after I finished the unboxing experience, I put it up on this Visa mount to save space and also give me a little bit more flexibility in the way I use the monitor. The slightly less than 1-inch bezel that completely surrounds the monitor don't really bother me. I like the aesthetic of them if I have to have bezels, but they can be a deal breaker for somebody who's trying to have maybe a multi-monitor setup and line everything as closely together as possible. But at that point, you're probably not in this budget 4K range anyway. There are plenty of spec sheets and other reviews that list off all the specs of this monitor, so I'm gonna try to run through this as quickly as possible. Basically, it's a 4K 28-inch monitor that has a TN panel, Amd Freesync, and HDR. The HDR looks pretty good. I'm running this HDR YouTube video, so it's not going to be the best fidelity, but it looks good. I don't see too much zoning issues in terms of the brightness in different spots of the screen. So on the HDR 4K side of it, yeah, it's 4K. I've been using the monitor for about a month now as mainly a secondary monitor for my PC, but also a primary monitor for my Mac. The reason for this is that my 1070 is perfectly capable of hitting above 60 FPS in most of the games I play. So, I mean, people say that there's an argument between resolution and frame rate, but, you know, if I have the choice, I will generally go for a worse overall image quality to hit higher frames per second. But using it as a dual monitor setup for my PC, there were some issues that I came across. Windows sort of has this weird processing to have a 144Hz monitor in addition to a 60Hz, so you have to configure that. And aside from that, my gaming monitor is 1080p and this is a 4K monitor, so there were also differences there, and it made booting into a game and tabbing out of a game take extremely long times. So when I'm gaming, I actually just turn off the secondary monitor and leave it to only detect the primary monitor. Gaming on the 4K monitor is very good for a 60Hz monitor. It's quite sharp, the colors are decent, the HDR really helps things come alive, and it will tell you that it's running something HDR enabled in the bottom right corner of the screen. Talking about the software on the monitor itself, it's very okay. I would say that the overall menu experience is exactly what you would expect from something like this, not super high-end monitor. The one thing that does really bug me about the software is one, the default extreme sharpening, and I think that's to make things look more 4K, but if you're running it natively 4K, it just comes off as a little bit over sharpened. I thought the colors were pretty good out of the box. I did not do anything to them, and they seemed good. There are quite a few modes, but going back to the one thing that really annoyed me. If you're using the monitor's speakers, which You probably will be at some point, and BenQ should know this because they included speakers in the monitor. Adjusting the volume is so tedious. First of all, the ticks don't seem to do very much. Like, I can hardly see any difference between 9 and 20 in terms of volume. And just navigating to the point where you can actually control the volume is bad. If you're going to have speakers on the monitor, make it easy to adjust the volume, because it probably takes me 10 seconds if I'm just sitting there to change the volume at all. And that's not good. The speakers themselves are very adequate for maybe something like watching a quick YouTube video, or if you're playing a game that the audio fidelity doesn't really matter much. Like, I play Smash Bros on it, and I'm fine with that. I don't need to be immersed in the sound to have a good time playing Smash. But I would not watch a movie or watch TV shows with this monitor's audio quality. It just, if I'm trying to really enjoy the audio part of it, this is not the right setup. So I've actually linked everything to just a different speaker if I'm planning on trying to listen to something. The screen's visual fidelity far outweighs the sound quality, and that makes for a really weird experience when you're trying to like watch a movie or something. The hardware, I would say, is perfectly fine. $400 4K monitor. It's solid. The screen has a little bit of an anti-glare. It does some eye protective stuff that I don't really notice, but I mean, if it's protecting your eyes, that's fine with me. And then the software on the monitor is standard, with the exception of how annoying that volume switching is. It's just really annoying. Visually, I've tried to capture as well as I can how the monitor looks on camera. You can replicate up to about 75% of actual color with this monitor, which does not make it great for something like Photoshop or extreme photo editing. I will say that on daily use, this does not bother me at all, and I've actually found that I really like doing other productivity things on this monitor. I think it looks good, it looks sharp, but it's not necessarily a professional monitor. For anybody who does not look at color professionally, I think you will be more than satisfied with the visual quality of this monitor. It is on the lower end for the cost of a good company to buy a 4K monitor from. And I think that's really where this monitor shines. It's 4K, decently built, for not too much money. And if that's all you're looking for, I can recommend this monitor. I think it's really great for just having a 4K monitor and having something that everything looks pretty good on. Once again, my three main use cases are secondary monitor for my PC, primary monitor for my Mac, and then primary monitor for gaming with my Nintendo Switch. Right away, I can say that the Nintendo Switch is probably the easiest for this monitor to be really good at, because the Switch only outputs 1080p anyway, so you can just plug in, play games. There are two HDMI ports as well as a display port, and this makes it really easy to switch between all of my devices. It's actually really convenient. In fact, if I just turn on my Nintendo Switch, the monitor will light up, and it'll be ready to play within seconds, and that has been really great. I really enjoy this monitor as a gaming monitor for the Nintendo Switch. Looking past that, my Mac only has an HDMI out, and HDMI only natively supports true 4K at 30 frames per second, or even 24 frames per second in some cases. So I had to do a lot of work and install third-party software to push out 2160 resolution at 60 Hertz through my Mac's HDMI port into the HDMI port in the monitor. This isn't necessarily a problem with the way BenQ implemented it, but having two HDMI ports and one display port means that there's a little bit of a potential for bottlenecking through HDMI on this 4K monitor. And I think if I were to design something that is expecting 4K input, I would focus on having multiple display ports. So there are some workarounds. So my Mac does have a mini display port / Thunderbolt port, but I would have to get an adapter and then hope that converting the mini display port to HDMI would work. And I haven't tried it yet, but I figured I don't really want to, just because I can force the frame rate to be better by lowering resolution a little bit. So didn't seem completely worth it to me. However, even at 2160, this monitor still does a really good job with having acceptable, good color, and it's still quite sharp at this resolution. And this is the only time where I felt like the software sharpening included in this monitor made sense, because things did look more clear up close with this software property enabled. I boosted it up to 8, and things looked pretty good for text. And that made this monitor extremely good for, web browsing, just using it as a computer work. I did a lot of Excel spreadsheet stuff on it, and it performed fantastically. So nothing that would really require great color gamut or really high performance display, but for my purposes, and even some video editing and minor photo editing, not very important stuff, it worked really great and I really enjoyed it. So if you want to have something that can plug into your PC and then also have a port for your Nintendo Switch, it works fantastically for that. And if you want to have something that plugs into your PC and then also can be a primary monitor for another device, and you just use it when you really need it on your PC, I also think it's pretty fantastic. For $400 4K, everything looks and works really well. And because BenQ markets this as a gaming 4K monitor, I might as well play some games on it. And what I can say is that it works fine. If you have a computer that can output 60 Hz 4K, this would be a good budget option. But once again, you could also get a 144 Hz monitor at 1080p if your computer can push out those frames, and you might have a more enjoyable gaming experience. I mean, it's really just up to what you prefer, resolution or frame rate. But once again, it did not seem to be really lacking much in terms of color accuracy, and the HDR in certain games made the visuals really pop. To finish things off, I did actually want to test this monitor using AMD's open source Freesync with an Nvidia graphics card, now that the latest driver supports that, which is pretty cool. And I'll play some games that are more likely to have frame tearing, like FPSs, if you didn't have FreeSync support. So this is an example of where I could have Counter-Strike on my main monitor, my 144 Hz gaming monitor, and then also have the broadcast and the Twitch stream on the 4K monitor. So here's the tab out process. As I said, it takes a really long time and it messes a little bit with the responsiveness of the computer while it's switching monitors. And then here, if I wanted to adjust the screen, go like that, maybe bring up my Steam a little bit, and then go back into the game. And this process is not nearly as smooth as I would like it to be, but that's a Windows thing. That's a Windows trying to figure out what to do with the different resolutions and the different refresh rates and all of that sort of stuff. Now I'm going to try and use AMD Freesync on this monitor and treat it as my primary monitor while also having an Nvidia GPU. So let's see how that goes. Go into my display preferences in Windows and then show only on 2. So now this monitor is going to be the only monitor that my computer really interacts with. Going to enable G-Sync for this selected display. The monitor is reworking itself. And as you can see, if you saw that in the bottom corner, that basically just said that HDR is on, so Windows and my computer interact with the monitor and say that this is an HDR enabled port and can view HDR content. So now with AMD FreeSync enabled, I'm going to be testing gaming on this 4K monitor. To be honest, I still do see quite a bit of screen tearing. Ooh, that's pretty bad. You know what, I can't tell quite if it's screen tearing or if I'm just not used to gaming at 60 Hz. No, I definitely see a little bit. So I just remembered that for G-Sync FreeSync to work, it needs to go through a DisplayPort. So that means I just have to take the DisplayPort cable out of the 144 Hz monitor and plug it into the 4K monitor. And that brings back the point of Why aren't there more DisplayPort inputs? I don't know if that's something that is outlandish, but would have been helpful. So yeah, after preliminary research, it does seem like very few monitors have multiple display ports for input, but there are a few, and I wish this were one of them. So now finally this monitor is running with G-Sync FreeSync enabled, as well as through DisplayPort. And that was a little tiring, but it's okay. So from what I can see is after limiting the frame rate in Csgo to 58 or 59, there actually does seem to be a reduced amount of screen tearing. Especially compared to my previous test, which used the HDMI input. The screen tearing was terrible at 60 hertz, 60 FPS. But, I mean, sorry if this just constant shaking is nauseating, but the screen tearing does seem to be a little bit better. Csgo I'm just using a test because it's something that I'm used to. But Csgo is actually a game that you wouldn't want any sort of FreeSync, G-Sync, V-Sync, or whatever, because it does increase input latency just by a tiny bit. Although I'm having a very, very hard time telling at all. So I'm going to move on to a different game that is everybody's favorite monitor PC benchmarking game. That of course is Fortnite. So I'm capping frame rate at 40. Everything else is on Epic. I'm gonna just play at 4K. Absolutely doubt that this is gonna be playable at this resolution. Although the image quality does look fantastic. It's really hard to tell just through the camera, but the visual quality of this game is really, really good. And you know what? At 40 frames per second, At 40 frames per second, playing this in 4K actually looks really good. I'm surprised. So in 4K, with G-Sync FreeSync compatibility enabled, the game ran really smoothly for about 40 frames per second. So I'm going to reduce a little bit of the 3D rendering quality and see how it plays at about 60 frames per second. But visually, the game looks really, really good, and there was hardly any noticeable tearing. Probably, none that I really noticed. And it played well. You can start to see how TN panels aren't the best at viewing angles, but the definition and the fidelity at each individual pixel and each individual model looks really, really fantastic in 4K. So at this point, I'm mostly hitting 60 frames per second, and there is a little bit of stuttering and tearing. Just some weird artifacting going on. Let's see if things get better when I'm landed on the ground and rendering becomes less of a hassle. That was honestly pretty sad. I think I'm gonna open up custom resolution utility, see if I can extend the FreeSync range, because I do find it odd that I'm getting more tearing when I have better frames per second. So I feel that it's in the FreeSync range, and the screen tearing is pretty much non-existent, but also there is a little bit more input latency. So even for a game that's, not super competitive in terms of an esport, you do feel the additional few milliseconds of input latency. I wish you could see this on a 1080p video. I kind of understand 4K gaming a little more now, just because everything's so, everything looks so good. With the exception of this screen tearing when FreeSync is not kicking in. The game just, it plays, the responsiveness of the screen when FreeSync is not enabled is great. The visuals are really good. It's just a matter of, I think, fine-tuning a little bit. Depending on which game you're playing and what style you're going for. If you care more about response time, just disable FreeSync. But FreeSync does seem to work pretty well with this monitor, and yeah, it looks good. So in terms of gaming with this BenQ monitor in 4K, it works pretty well. It looks really great. HDR looks awesome, and the FreeSync G-Sync compatibility seems to be there. It seems to work pretty well. I'm sure with a little bit more custom tuning in the FreeSync range, I would be able to get more consistent results. But when the frames dropped, FreeSync came in and smoothed things out, and there was pretty much no screen tearing. So gaming on this monitor is actually pretty good, but once again, not, as good in my opinion as on a 144Hz monitor in terms of just pure gameplay and feel. But visually, it was really, really great. Overall, my thoughts about this monitor are that it's pretty good for being a 4K HDR monitor. At $400, it's on the more budget side of these types of monitors, but it's still pretty expensive. I found that I really enjoyed the uses that I've put it to, and I think that if you are somewhat in that same ballpark, I would really recommend this monitor. It's been really great, and I've really enjoyed using it. 4K gaming, maybe it's just my own personal biases, but I'm still a little bit iffy on it, and I don't know if I would buy a 4K monitor just for gaming, but maybe that's just because my PC is not powerful enough to always do that with the games that I want to play. Once again, I have to thank BenQ for sending this monitor out for me to review. My name is Dylan Hong, this has been Dylan Hong Tech. Like and subscribe for some more tech goodness, and thanks for watching.